When the history of this age is written, the Silmarils,
they will merit little more than a whisper.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 6 video. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references. We're into like the last couple episodes of the season, so like they're finally heating up into like the really big battle of the season, which is the fall of Eregion. So we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. Careful for spoilers. If you have not seen the episode yet, we'll just start at the beginning, work our way through shot by shot, talking about Easter eggs, WTF moments, starting with the episode title, Where Is He?, which is a reference to Adar's carving on the elves' body, asking, where is Sauron? Because he thinks that Sauron is working with the elves to build his weapon that he was trying to make back when Adar killed him at the beginning of the Second Age. And he's not wrong about that. Like, he's building a weapon with the elves, but he's using the elves against Adar, pitting them against each other. He thinks that he's allied with the elves, but that's not really what's going on. The actual opening scene starts with Earendil running to catch Adar's army, catching a couple stragglers. The subtitles refer to them as deserter orcs, so the idea is that not all orcs are that loyal to Adar, like they're willing to throw away their allegiance because they don't want to die, thinking that Sauron is not actually back. Like, he's not a thing. We don't need to worry about this. Like, why throw away our lives trying to fight the elves for a ghost? How this will come back to bite them in the ass. But the whole idea here is that Earendil gets the map from the orcs, so he knows now that the orc army, Adar's army, is on its way to Eregion. So the idea is the last couple of episodes, this big battle of Eregion, everyone's meant to be converging there. Like, the dwarves have started to figure out what's going on there. There's also Gil-galad's army. We'll talk about that when we get to that part of the episode, because there are a couple of Gil-galad references, because currently he's planning on marching them to Mordor. Not to Eregion, which is where they're really needed. Back at Celebrimbor's workshop, he's having trouble forging the 9 rings for men. You can see just piles and piles of his attempts around the workshop here. They play it fast and loose on the timeline of each episode, but a bunch of time is meant to have gone by since Sauron came back to Eregion and they started forging the 9 rings. You have to think of it as weeks going by, not days. Sauron already turned his staff against him, so the more unhinged Celebrimbor gets, the more the other elves start to hate him. I think this is part of Sauron's long-term plan to get the other elves to help him when it comes time for him to steal all the rings for men. We find out the dwarves stop sending mithril shipments to actually make the rings, not because of what Durin IV said, because he's all wary of Sauron, even though he doesn't know that it's Sauron. He just thinks that something weird is up with the rings. Is all because the ring has made Durin III way more greedy, and he's holding out, not wanting to send them more, expecting them to pay more for them. They made some changes about the way the rings affect the dwarves from the books. In the books, the negative effects of the rings, like Sauron's influence on the rings, doesn't actually have an effect on the dwarves, but on the TV show version, it does. So the ring is Sauron basically polluting Durin III's mind, making him more greedy.
It is mine. Belongs to me.
It's mine. My own. My pressure.
Yes, Sauron does want the mithril to finish the 9 rings, like he's on a clock here, it's ticking. But he also wants to sow division amongst the races of Middle-earth so they won't band together, unite against him. So he's trying to drive a wedge between the elves and the dwarves, which is why he's using his influence over Durin's ring to influence his mind and make him more greedy, holding out for more money. This whole thing with Celebrimbor forgetting Mordania's name is just Sauron twisting him up inside so badly. Like, he basically locks him inside his own workshop using illusions to trap him inside there. The deeper he descends into his own mind, like they start talking about it here, like, shouldn't you spend more time just thinking about your thoughts? The more time he sits here stewing just all by himself, the crazier he gets. You also notice that Sauron has switched to wearing black, slowly starting to show his true colors, ... getting bolder and bolder. Remember, there's only 2 episodes left, so like he's gonna have to show his hand pretty soon. Like, eventually Celebrimbor will learn the truth, everyone in Eregion will learn the truth, but not until it's too late. You also notice that he's using his powers. Sauron is using his powers to make Celebrimbor see or not see certain things, like he's creating illusions around him. Like here, they don't show his hammer, but the minute he looks back, the hammer is back there. That's more of Sauron's tricks. He does it later in the episode too, where he makes him think that everything is fine outside, so he doesn't see the orcs. They're not really clear on Sauron's exact power levels in this form after his body's already been destroyed once. He's still crazy powerful, but like not nearly as powerful as Morgoth or the Valar. So you can see later in the episode, that's why he has to like cut his hand and use his blood to sew a much bigger illusion. Sauron then uses this as an opportunity to take control of the administration of Eregion to sort of grease the wheels and get this war with the orcs started. He wants the orcs to invade so that he can use the chaos to steal the rest of the rings. You also notice right outside the forge there's a statue of Feanor holding one of the Silmarils. Celebrimbor is Feanor's grandson, so he looks at Feanor as sort of like this high figure that he wants to surpass. He wants to create something that will be remembered as being greater than the Silmarils. Later in the episode, Sauron plays him like a fiddle again, using this against him, like, oh, your rings will be viewed as so much greater than the Silmarils. Nobody will even remember those crazy Silmarils when they see the rings. But at least at the beginning of the episode, the elves are just starting to see the signs of the orcs. Like, why aren't we getting any more visitors? Like, where are all the traders? How come people have been coming in? What's going on here? Are things happening on the road? We start to see more of him twisting Mordania around his finger. She's clearly down bad for him. He's just using it against her. Early theory, she'll be the one to help him steal the rings for men. Then we see Adar treating with Galadriel. They bond over their hatred of Sauron with a bunch of callbacks to Season 1 with the other version of Adar before they recast him. They both bond over how Sauron messed with both of their minds. We find out what Sauron's bargain with Adar was way back when he saved him during the Years of the Trees. This was back after Morgoth experimented on those original elves, turning them into orcs, and sounds like he just forgot about them, like he just didn't care anymore. Like, whatever, I'll just throw you to the mountaintop and forget about you. He tells him that Sauron promised him children, which explains why all the orcs here think of him as their father, like they literally call him father. But I also kind of think the twist here is that some of these orcs do have some sort of biological connection to him, like he probably had some children back then who then begat many, many further generations of orcs, because the life cycle of orcs moves pretty quickly. They breed like rabbits, so there is a pretty good chance that Adar is a common ancestor for a lot of these modern orcs. The reason why Adar is still alive in present day is because he still has so much of that elven biology in him, and elves are immortal. Presumably after those original 13 elves that were turned into orcs had enough further generations, like enough generations were born, the immortality was bred out of them. Then he shows Galadriel Sauron's crown, which is Morgoth's crown. So there's a couple more book changes here, but we get a couple big lore dumps. In the books, Morgoth's crown was actually melted down and used to make the chain that binds him outside the door of night. On the show, the way they explained it, though, is that Sauron just grabbed Morgoth's crown and then reforged it to a size that would fit his own head, because Morgoth himself, as a Valar, way more powerful and way, way bigger than Sauron was. Just because the movies trade so heavily on Sauron is this overarching, powerful, big bad, people forget that Morgoth is meant to be vastly more powerful than Sauron ever was. Unless you count Tom Bombadil, because they're so mysterious about how powerful he actually is, technically Morgoth is meant to be the second most powerful being in existence next to Iluvitar. Adar starts talking more about Morgoth's crown. It was actually forged to hold the 3 Silmarils when he stole them during the First Age, which we just saw a statue of in Eregion, Feanor, who created the Silmarils. And the idea is that he says he kept the crown around because it actually has legit power inside it, and he used that power to kill Sauron during the beginning of the Second Age. It's not meant to be just a regular metal crown. It actually has a ton of power imbued in it, which he wants to use to try and kill Sauron again in combination with the power of the 3 Elven rings. Here's the big problem with that. Like, there's a couple lore issues with that, because you cannot kill immortal beings. You can destroy their bodies, but you actually can't destroy their essence. That's how Sauron keeps coming back multiple times. Even Gandalf, who gets killed, gets brought back because he's an immortal Maiar. Then Adar correctly guesses that Sauron has been masquerading as Halbrand and was trying to trick him into fighting the elves, but later there's a twist in the episode that doesn't totally make sense, because he learns all these things about what's really going on with Sauron, what's really going on with the rings, like he gets all this information, but then later in the episode when Galadriel explains that Sauron is playing him, making him attack Eregion because that's what he wants him to do, Adar does not believe her. For some reason, he believes everything she says except for that one thing, which just seems weird. Back in Numenor, Farazone holds judgment over Elendil over the fight in the shrine last week. This is all to set up the big twist with the faithful later in the episode in the Valar saving Miriel. They're basically trying to set up this further division between the faithful and the Kingsmen, the people that were loyal to Farazone. On the show and in the books, Elendil is destined to help lead the faithful back to Middle-earth at some point, so they're basically just trying to make things seem worse and worse on Numenor, till they eventually get to the point where Elendil and Miriel are like, alright, you know what, let's get out of here, we don't need this anymore, let's go back to Middle-earth with the faithful. Then we see the stranger getting visions of Nori and Poppy screaming. The Easterlings have knives to them, threatening to kill them, forcing him into submission, which is what they said that they were planning to do earlier this season. Then he sees a vision of the dark wizard, the other Istari, falling rocks, making it seem like the evil wizard was going to kill all the halflings, like this entire village of them living out there. He's still with Tom Bombadil, who tries to basically offer him the fork in the road choice. Like, you have to take one path. Either you train and continue to try and learn your power as a wizard, find a staff, or you go and save your friends. There's a bunch of references to Iluvitar and the secret fire, the sacred flame. Basically, the secret fire is like the power of creation that only Iluvitar has. Like, that's how he creates the world, he creates beings, other things, pretty much anything in general. None of the other beings like the Valar or the Maiar have the sacred flame. They can't create things the same way, which basically sets up the entire conflict during the Silmarils with Morgoth going against Iluvitar and the other Valar. Morgoth is obsessed with finding the secret fire because he wants to create things himself too, and because he can't do that, that's why he comes to Middle-earth and seeks to take dominion over it, reshaping it in his own image, because if he could, he would have just gone off and created a completely separate world of his own making. The way that Tom Bombadil talks about it, though, he's basically telling the stranger that Iluvitar speaks to other people and can send them visions if they're listening. There's actually many references in the books to Iluvitar acting directly in the story, like literally stepping into the story. Most of the time later in the timeline, he's very hands-off with these kinds of things. Really good example is making the world round and seeking the island of Numenor, and then later when Gandalf is killed by the Balrog or killed during his fight with the Balrog, he resurrects him, basically turning his spirit back around and sending it back to Middle-earth where he becomes Gandalf the White. There's a lot of other little examples like that throughout the entire timeline from beginning to end of Lord of the Rings. But the idea here is that Tom Bombadil is basically saying that Iluvitar is telling him what's going to happen. Then they begin his wizard training montage. Nori separately has a conversation with the Gundabale, making it sound like most of their village will stay here in their little hobbit holes, and only some will travel back to Middle-earth and eventually create the Shire. Nobody explains why he's called Nobody to Poppy, because his parents just waited till too long to give him the name, and by then nobody had stuck, so it just continued being his name. Also, their whole relationship thing here, I think, is to set up the idea that he does travel back west with them and helps create the Shire. They make it sound like the stranger is going to find his staff at some point soon, but when Tom Bombadil says, "Many that died deserve life, some that live deserve death, who are you to give it to them?" That's the same line that Gandalf tells to Frodo later in the timeline. When he says he has all the time that he needs, that's because he's immortal as a Maiar. He literally has all the time that he needs. Like, if you want to spend hundreds of years searching for a staff, you actually can do that. Then he says if he leaves to go save Nori and Poppy, he won't be able to continue on this path. Like, either you learn to become a wizard as an Istari, like you come fully into your powers, fight Sauron, fight the Dark Wizard, or you go save your friends. Tom Bombadil also basically tells him that they'll never meet again after this. Which also makes me think that the stranger might not be Gandalf, because later in the timeline, Gandalf does spend a lot of time with Tom Bombadil during the events of The Hobbit. We will see. The argument about who the stranger is continues. Like, some people really do think that he's Gandalf, but there's some evidence that he's not Gandalf and he's one of the other blue wizards. But this whole twist of him choosing one or the other is sort of like the Mandalorian with Grogu and Luke Skywalker. Like, choose the lightsaber or choose the path of the Beskar armor and go back to Mando. When Tom Bombadil just disappears Batman style, this makes me think that this is the last time we'll see him this season. Like, he won't come back. Back at Khazad-dûm, everyone's busy taking advantage of the light, giving over the extra ring tax to King Durin, and we see Sauron has come to twist them more around his finger, talking about more rings on fingers metaphors here, and get his mithril. Durin the Fourth very clearly calls him out, thinking that he's doing some shady stuff with the rings, but the reminder here is that he doesn't know that it's Sauron. He just thinks he's doing something shady with the rings influencing his father. Interesting detail here about Sauron's master plan. So, like I said, he's trying to sow division amongst the different races of Middle-earth. If you remember, a couple episodes ago, we saw that the Ents were absolutely pissed that the Elves were cutting down trees. Like, how dare you cut down the trees? And Earendil swore that they wouldn't do that anymore. Sauron very quickly tells Durin that they'll give them all the timber that they need for their mines, which he's using the ring to basically cause him to want to overmine their mountain. So if Sauron gets his way, it'll basically cause the elves to piss the Ents off even more, but also the idea is that Durin turns him down. Now, Sauron gets mad at this for a second too. There's also a cool Balrog reference too. But the idea is that Sauron knows that he's going to eventually get his mithril, and Durin is getting more and more greedy, just holding out for more money from the elves. When he offers him something more precious, I think that's meant to be a reference to the Naglamir, which itself contained a Silmaril. It was a work of the dwarves and the elves in partnership, but wound up causing a huge fight between them. When he sees the Balrog in the fire, I think that's him just referencing that eventually he knows the Balrog is there and it will wind up kicking the dwarves out, basically destroying most of Khazad-dûm. Like, just wait for it, we'll see that Balrog soon. Sauron is basically causing everyone to hate each other while also getting what he wants, which is ultimately the Nine Rings. Later we see Durin III crying about going against his father. I think they just want to tease that he might have to usurp him at some point, because I do think that we will see the dwarves fighting with the elves, because canonically that did happen. Like, eventually they did fight together. Early theory, we will see Durin IV using his axe fighting with Elrond, maybe in the last couple of episodes. But at some point Durin IV will become the king and he'll be able to make those calls, just meaning that his father has to die at some point in the next season or two, so R.I.P. Back at Numenor, Elendil says he's being asked to set his integrity aflame. This is meant to be a reference to the Kingsmen in Pharazôn burning the white tree, which they focus on very heavily in a shot like, ooh, you want to be worried about that white tree. In the books, they wound up burning that as an offering to Morgoth after Sauron had convinced them to worship Morgoth. It kind of seems like Elendil is slowly emotionally letting Eärien, his daughter, go. Not because he hates her, but you can see that Pharazôn is trying to twist her against him, like, he said that you would say this. Miriel comes, acknowledges her feelings for him, so I think they're just setting up the idea that she will eventually be his queen when they go back to Middle-earth and create their own kingdom. She makes a bunch of references to the faithful and then basically takes the sentence from him, submitting herself to the judgment of the Valar and the big sea monster. This is just more to set up the idea that she will help lead the faithful back to Middle-earth. They just want to show you the deepening division between the different peoples in Numenor. I think part of the scene here where she gets pulled underwater by the sea creature is that it sort of stares into her soul, and she is ultimately saved by the Valar. She's also got some crazy lung capacity, and how nice of it is of the sea creature to basically throw her up higher on land, like, no, we're not going to make you crawl up out of the rocks here, I'll put you on the steps. So this just catalyzes more people to the side of the faithful, and obviously you still have a bunch of the haters who are part of the Kingsmen, Pharazôn supporters. Then we see him using the Palantir, seeing the fires of Mount Doom. He sees Sauron in his Halbrand form in front of a fireplace, maybe after he comes to Numenor, and teasing more of that storyline from the books, because there's a big period in the books when Sauron is on Numenor, twisting them, tricking them into invading Valinor. Just because of the way the Palantir work, this also implies that Pharazôn learns that Halbrand is Sauron, and that might lead to them capturing him eventually and bringing him back to Numenor. There's just a couple ways they have to explain the downfall of Numenor, and in order for a lot of that to happen, it involves Sauron being on Numenor, so we'll see how they accomplish that on the show. At some point, he has to return, and also because he's supposed to give one of the rings for men to one of the Numenoreans, which seems like it's going to be Kemen. That feels like a Season 3 kind of thing, just based on the way they're building up towards the final battle of Eregion during the last couple of episodes. Then for like a brief hot second, you think that the elves are going to ally with the orcs when Galadriel's like, okay, fine, we'll team up against Sauron. But he basically plays her saying that you already gave me all the information I need, which is where the ring, like her ring Nenya, is going to be, because he wants to steal that. And it sounds like he wants to be the one to use Morgoth's crown in combination with the ring to defeat Sauron. Which also itself feels like them doing exactly what Sauron wants them to do, like he's playing them, causing them to bring the rings and the crown to him. Sauron wants his crown, and he wants the elven rings. It'll be way easier for him to take those if they bring them to Eregion, rather than Sauron having to trek all over the world hunting all this stuff down. And it seems like Adar does not want to believe when Galadriel tells him exactly that, like we're playing into his hand. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. The other important thing here too is when he raises the idea of what happens to the orcs if they do team up. Like after the battle, if we do defeat Sauron, what are you going to do to the orcs? Will you let us live in peace? Which is actually something that George R. R. Martin, talking about Game of Thrones, completely different story universe, has actually talked about a lot. So he said the idea in the Lord of the Rings story is that the books never really get into the details of what Aragorn did with the rest of the orcs after the last battle in Return of the King. Did he let the surviving orcs live and thrive, or did he go around killing all the orcs, the orc women, all the orc babies? What happened to all the orcs? Then we see Adar's army start their siege engines, actually starting the battle of Eregion, the siege of Eregion. Sauron cuts his palm to weave an even stronger illusion, because remember, the 9 rings have not been completed yet, so he really needs Celebrimbor to finish that work, so he traps him in an even more powerful illusion. The reason why he hands him Feanor's hammer, and he wasn't using it before this, like why Celebrimbor didn't use Feanor's hammer, is because it's sacred to him. Remember, he created the Silmarils. It's basically like the most treasured possession that he has. I'm also kind of wondering if they're trying to set up the idea that Sauron will take Feanor's hammer and use that to craft the One Ring of Power eventually. The other cool connection, like big lore Easter egg here too, is that both Sauron and Feanor were apprenticed to Aule the smith. That's how both of them became such great smiths. That was actually what Sauron was doing before Morgoth came around and twisted Sauron to join his side. Originally, Sauron was not evil. Love the transition here too after Celebrimbor goes back inside to continue his work, where the illusion drops and you see what's really happening, and is basically all-out war with siege coming to Eregion. Sauron then uses his power, seeming like he raises what is like a fog of war, I think basically just to help the orcs lay siege to Eregion, like he just wants it to happen faster. It seems like based on the pacing, most of the last 2 episodes will be the actual battle itself, with maybe like a bit of the aftermath at the end of episode 3, also to set up the idea with him taking the 9 rings and finding the different 9 men across the different kingdoms to give them to. That'll probably be like the season 3 teaser, because like that's the next big step, is that him actually finding the 9 that will eventually become the Nazgul. So early theory, they don't actually tease him forging the One Ring of Power till like the end of season 3 or like some point during season 4, so probably still going to be a while before we see the One Ring of Power. There's a bunch of stuff happening in the episode, so if there's anything you spotted, any Easter eggs or references that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. In my full episode 7 video, we'll post next week after they release it. Big reminder too, we also have the Penguin episodes in the DC universe. It's meant to be a Batman Robert Pattinson spinoff. My episode 1 video for that will post next, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. Everybody click here for all my House of the Dragon Season 3 videos, and click here for all my Lord of the Rings Rings of Power episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.